Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the graduate panel. We will have two speakers today, and Elizabeth Plummer is going to be our first speaker. Let me just tell you a little bit about Elizabeth. She's a doctoral candidate at the University of Iowa in a foreign language and ESL education program. She has taught English at the elementary, university, and adult levels, and currently teaches educational technology to pre-service K-12 teachers. Her research interests include CAL, teacher training, and distance education. Her dissertation work is focused on the experiences and training of online language teachers. Please welcome Elizabeth.
So this is exciting. I didn't think I would be first, so hopefully you guys aren't looking for the writing people first. I'm excited to talk to you guys today about something that I love, which is teaching language online and training individuals to teach language online, to get really excited about it. So this is actually my dissertation study, and I'm going to defend this in a couple of weeks. So hopefully everything makes sense here, and I don't bore you too much. Thinking about my background in literature review, I thought maybe I shouldn't just bore you guys, and I should just direct you to last year's technology showcase, where you can see my literature review in Tuesday's graduate student panel, and I was the last presentation. So if you're interested in sort of the background and the literature involved in my study, you can look at that archive. That way I won't bore you too much, and we can focus on what I think is really interesting, what I found out. I do want to point out one thing that I pulled from my literature that I used as sort of a foundation for my study. And that's these 11 practice areas, and it does not look the same on here that it did on my computer, and I apologize. We might have some conversion issues between the PC and the Mac. So these are these 11 practice areas, and these were sort of the foundation for my research. And these are areas in the research that have come up as areas that online teachers need to know, and I modified them for online language teachers using the research and online language teachers. And so I use these as my foundation sort of for my research. So let's talk about my study. I won't bore you too much with my method, but I conducted a survey. It was a 40-item online survey. I posted the survey everywhere I could possibly post it, on listservs. I sent out thousands of emails, nearly 8,000 emails to individuals that I thought could possibly be language teachers, to administrators I thought might have language teachers at their schools, at virtual schools. I sampled all grade levels, all language levels, because there really is relatively little research in who teaches language online. And so I didn't really have an idea of what kind of response rate I would get. So I wanted to get as much as I could possibly. And so for those of you who are researchers, we call this comprehensive criterion sampling is what I did. And I got a total of 264 respondents, which I was really happy with. So that's where my data comes from, is from these 264 online language teachers. My results, I'm going to talk briefly about the demographics. I was going to go through it really, really quickly, but they tell me I have a lot more time than I thought I would, so I might go a little bit slower than I planned. I'm going to talk about the types of training that they said that they've received, the challenges that they report, the recommendations that they make for training future online language teachers, and then some conclusions and my results. And hopefully I won't bore you too much. I haven't put too much of my stats that I did in here to try to make it more relevant. In terms of who these individuals are, they primarily were female, 71.9% of them. You see that in the left-hand side there, in that pie. On the right, you see their age, and they were aged, were mostly 31 to 50 years old. So they weren't in the younger early career, but they were sort of in that older age bracket. In terms of the institution that they taught at, they primarily taught at public institutions, followed by virtual and online institutions was the second form. Something that was really interesting in my study that they haven't found in past studies of online teachers in general is that the majority, that 68, almost 70%, were full-time instructors. And typically in online studies of online teachers, they're primarily part-time. I did find a lot of part-time, almost 25%, and a few others, and those are individuals who teach multiple jobs, who are students and doing this on the side, and so didn't feel like they were part-time. But I wanted you to think about that. Nearly 70% of them said that they were full-time, because we're going to come back to that. They came from 20 different countries around the world, primarily from the US. 184 of them came from the US, and they were represented in 45 states in the US. That's considerably more than what we found in the past. In the past, it's typically in the 20s. And we know from the literature review, which you can review in the archive, that the number of enrollments in online programs in the states has increased. So nearly every state in the United States now offers some sort of online education somewhere. And a lot of them have online K-12 virtual schools, which is that virtual online, that second one. So there's a lot more in my study who say they teach at these virtual online schools, because in the past 5 years, we have a whole lot more. And we see that now represented in the data. These are the grade levels they taught. The respondents could choose more than one grade level. So they could say, I teach both early childhood education and the elementary education. The majority of them taught higher education, which is consistent with what we found in the past. So as I said in the last slide, they were primarily from public institutions in higher education, and that's what we found in the past. The majority of our formal online education courses are at public institutions in higher ed. Now, this doesn't count informal learning from companies such as Mango Languages and our favorite Rosetta Stone languages. It doesn't count those. So I didn't look at that kind of language learning, because I really was looking at the teachers, and so they had to be formal classes, and typically that informal language learning, there isn't a teacher or they're just a tutor. This adult education group, 36 of them, only 10 of them just taught adult education. The other 16 also taught higher education. So I looked at those 10 individuals, and they were very closely matched to those in higher education. So when I was doing statistical analysis, I grouped them with the higher education, because there really wasn't a whole lot of them. There were just 10 of them. And they were very similar to the higher education group. So in terms of our breakdown, 63.7% of them were in higher education, and 36.3% were in pre-K-12. And that includes all grades from the early childhood education all the way up to high school secondary education. So I want you to think back about that full-time employment and this large number of higher education. And I did what's called a chi-square test of significance. And for stats nerds, I actually put it there. But what I found is that individuals in higher education were significantly more likely to be currently teaching in a face-to-face classroom. So that high numbers of full-time employment doesn't necessarily translate into full-time employment in online. And so I wasn't really able to capture, are you full-time in online? Because I didn't ask that question. So that's sort of a limitation when you're looking at that full-time, part-time. But it does tell us that a lot of these individuals in higher education are also teaching in a face-to-face classroom. And this idea becomes really important as I move forward into their training and their challenges, that they are currently teaching in a face-to-face classroom. These are the languages that they taught. It consisted of 20 different languages, including the four most commonly taught languages. If you guys aren't familiar with those terms, commonly taught and less commonly taught, there's 4. most commonly taught languages in the world, and that's Spanish, English, French, and German, which are the four first ones there on the left, and then 16 less commonly taught languages, Italian being the one that has the most, followed by Portuguese. So in terms of the breakdown, it was 82.9% commonly taught at 17.1% less commonly taught, which is actually pretty common in the splits of our courses. This, I think, is really fascinating in terms of right now and in terms of the future of language education. So the colors look different here than they do on the screen in the webcast. So I was going to do this by colors, but I'm going to do it by the bottom color is the total years teaching, and that includes face-to-face online and online. And so if you look, it's from fewer years to more years. These teachers were incredibly experienced, with the majority of them having taught for 6 or more years. But if you look at the top color, the majority of them have only been teaching online in the past 5 years. And this goes along with the things that we know, that online teaching is new, and especially online language teaching is incredibly new. And this shows us 158 of them have only been teaching in the past 5 years language learning online. So this is really important as we're talking about the challenges that they face, and we continue to pick apart the kinds of things that I found. I want to talk about the formal education that they've received. And this was really interesting and something that I didn't expect. They had a lot of education, the majority of them having at least a master's degree, if not a master's plus or a doctorate. But then when you think about the majority of the respondents that I found are teaching in higher education, then it makes more sense. But if you look at this bachelor's and bachelor's plus, these are relatively small numbers. So even in our pre-K-12, they still have a lot of education. So these are highly educated individuals that are teaching online. And this is different than our other disciplines, our general online education, where we have larger numbers of individuals who just have bachelor's and bachelor's plus. So there's something different in our online language instructors, that they have more education. Something that was really exciting for me is that 22.1% said that they hold an online endorsement, and that's considerably higher than the 1 to 2% that previous studies have found. So there's an increase not only in the prevalence of online education, but in individuals looking and seeking out training in these programs that are popping up. Another exciting thing is that almost all of them, 86.4%, received training in online teaching. This is really exciting. I thought from previous studies that I wouldn't find very much, but this is actually a lot of individuals who have. 54% of them said that they received training in online language teaching. And this is pretty consistent with what we find in our traditional training programs, that they get a lot of training in general, but not necessarily a lot of training in teaching language. So it's a similar pattern that we find, that they don't get a lot of training in teaching language online. I asked them specifically about which areas in those practice areas that they've received training, in their order here based by the most to the least. So they received the most training in technology and online course development, and the least training in professional practice in assistive technology. One of the things that I thought was really exciting is that half of them received training in online pedagogy, which is sort of kind of in the middle, next to online course customization. It's not surprising to me that they didn't receive training in professional practice. These are things like feeling isolated from colleagues, managing my time, keeping up with students' communication, but these are areas that online teachers have said are a challenge for them. One of the things that I did think was surprising is right above professional practice is digital etiquette, and this is a hot topic in online teaching and in online language teaching. This is like students using materials responsibly, and they didn't get a lot of training in this. But past studies have shown this is a real serious problem in our online, is students plagiarizing and cheating and this digital etiquette, but they don't really know a whole lot about it. I asked them which of these areas they had the most challenge with, and each of them were broken down into subcomponents, so subcategories. So I broke technology into several subcategories, as well as the other elements. Some of them only had one subcategory, and these are the areas they found the most challenging. In technology, these were all the subcategories in technology, including navigating, using different forms of media, helping students with technology. In managing the course, the one thing that they had the most trouble with was getting students to complete assignments, and that student attrition, student retention is really difficult in online courses. And then they didn't have, they had a lot of challenges with understanding best practices for teaching language online. And I think this brings up a really good point in our online language literature, is that we don't really have a cohesive set of best practices. And we have sort of sporadic skills and tips for teaching language online, but we don't really have good materials, and we aren't really disseminating good materials, like what does it mean to teach language online? And what does good teaching of language online look like? And so it's not surprising that they're struggling with this, because we don't really have a good cohesive set of best practices. This area in technology, keeping up with changing technology, is the area that they found the most difficulties with, that the most respondents said, I have a really hard time with this. And I want to highlight this because this will come into play later as we're talking about, because this is about time. Keeping up with changing technology requires a lot of time on the efforts of the instructors. These are the areas that they found the least challenge with. In managing course, they said managing my online classroom and setting course expectations. They didn't really have a lot of issues with this. And remember, these are experienced teachers. And so I found, as I looked at this data, that these kinds of things, they're transferring skills from their face-to-face teaching, and they're effectively transferring skills, they believe, in their self-report into their online classroom. So they feel like they don't have problems with this. In digital etiquette, these are the only two sub-areas I said of digital etiquette. But in their open comments, the last question was, is there anything else you want to tell me? They talked about plagiarism and cheating. And I think it's not these areas that I actually surveyed, but other areas having to do with language learning, like the use of translators for cheating. And I didn't really collect that data, and that's a limitation in sort of the way that I define digital etiquette. Because I think if we looked at it more closely, that our online teachers will have more issues with this than what I found. And then professional practice, feeling isolated from colleagues. And this is something that they said they didn't really have problems with, and that's, I mean, online teachers say it can be a problem, but our online teachers didn't say. And managing my time. And again, this is something that I want to bring up, because in the previous one we talked about keeping up with changing technology, which is having to do with time. They said they had a lot of problems with. But in managing my time, they said they didn't have a lot of problems with it. And this is something that consistently we see, that online teachers say, I have a hard time with time, it takes so much time, it's a lot of difficulties. And what I found as I've looked through this data is that it's not managing their time that they have a hard time with, it's getting recognition for how much time it takes to teach online and teach language online. They have a hard time getting support to have the amount of time. They have a hard time getting the release from other duties, or they have a hard time managing their personal and their professional, but in terms of managing their time, they said they didn't have. So I looked at differences among the higher education and the pre-K-12, and my study is actually quite extensive, and so that's why I'm only talking about a few things here. And in the challenges, these were the two primary differences between the higher education and the pre-K-12. And I bring this one up because the higher education had more challenges, significantly more challenges with online classroom management than those in pre-K-12. And when I said, you know, these teachers, as I've looked at the data, are able to transfer some of their skills from their face-to-face teaching because they do have a lot of experience in face-to-face teaching. We know that in the higher education that they don't do as well with teaching them how to be teachers. And I know from personal experience, having almost finished my PhD, that they don't do a lot of that in the training of individuals with doctorate degrees. How do you teach and how do you effectively teach? So how do I manage my class? So it's not surprising that they have significantly more challenges with that because they don't have as much of that skill to be able to transfer. And the pre-K-12 one, I just put it up there not because it's particularly insightful, but because it was a significant difference that they engaged, had challenges with engaging students' parents, more so than the higher education. I would hope that in higher education that they're not trying to engage the students' parents, but it's always a possibility. This is what they said when I asked them, what kind of training do you want in helping you to meet the challenges you have? There was a consistent pattern among individuals who said, I experienced this challenge a lot, that they wanted more structured training, more formal workshops, more online courses. And those who said, I only experienced this a little bit to some extent, wanting more unstructured training, more blogs, more self-led sort of tutorials and not formal sort of training. The only difference between this in this pattern was in the area of online language pedagogy, where nearly everyone who said that they experienced this challenge wanted structured training. So again, it tells us that we aren't doing a good job of disseminating what we do know, of pulling it together and getting it out there. And I saw that in the open comments where individuals were saying, I wish that there were communities. Well, there are communities of online language teachers. I belong to these communities, but we don't send that out. Of online English language teachers, there are communities of online English language teachers that I'm a part of, and we aren't sending that out. We aren't letting these individuals know that they exist and getting them connected to them. In terms of training preferences, higher education individuals expressed a preference across the board. I didn't put because I looked at all the subcomponents, but across the board they expressed a preference for structured training, and the pre-K-12 expressed a significant preference for unstructured training. So there's a difference in the kind of training that our higher education individuals would like in preference than our pre-K-12, that they did significantly want more structured than unstructured training. This last question here, and it looks really awful up there on the screen, is about recommendations for training. So I asked them, when do you think that our up-and-coming future online language teachers should receive training in these 11 skills areas? And so the blue, and I think the colors are okay, even though you can't see the numbers. The blue, which is the one all the way on the left, is that they say during formal education. So during formal training experience, you should get training in this. The second one, which is sort of orangey in both, I think, it might be more red up there, is after formal education, but before you teach online. So before you actually teach online, but you don't need it a part of the formal education. The green is that while teaching online, that we need this training. And then the little parts in the blue all the way at the end is that there's none that's needed. So the areas that they said during formal education that they need training is in technology and pedagogy and in language pedagogy, especially in online pedagogy and online language pedagogy. They wish, they talked about it in their open comments, more in their formal training programs about how to effectively teach language online. They want introductions to it, they want to know that this is an option, and consistently they talked about this. And so nearly 70% of them said, we think this should be included in formal training programs, which is a shift in our thinking and a shift in online education in general, that we're shifting from individuals who are early adopters of online education, individuals like me who love online education, individuals who were reluctant adopters but were asked to adopt by others, their administrators, from pressure from others, to now we're moving into mainstream adoption of online education. So it's more widespread. I mean, I had a significant number of individuals who are teaching language online, and it's only continuing to grow. One of the areas that I thought was really interesting is after formal education, the largest one is online course development. And that makes really a lot of sense because it's hard in formal training programs to think about developing an online course. I've thought and tried to build something like that, and I've always struggled and ended up with just doing individual lessons. How do I create individual lessons for an online environment? If you look, the two areas that had the most no professional development necessary were digital etiquette and professional practice. And these are two areas that I think that not only they are transferring skills from their traditional face-to-face teaching, but they're transferring skills from their personal lives. So how do I manage being alone is a skill that you don't necessarily have to learn in formal training programs for teaching, but it's a skill you can learn in other places. So these are some conclusions. That our current online language teachers are highly experienced, but they're new to online teaching. And so they expressed great challenges with technology, which is not surprising because our research shows us that individuals who are new to online teaching are so overwhelmed with the technology that they struggle with it so much, and it's only when they get more experienced that they start to think about other things. And so I saw that in several of the open comments. They said, yeah, I hadn't even thought that maybe I should get training on this, but it would help me in my online teaching, and I need to go figure out how to do this. So I found that they may not even know that they're deficient in other areas. I saw that we need to think about preparing the future of the online language teacher. That we need to think now about the individuals that are in our training programs, the individuals that are preparing to leave, the ones that are teaching in our face-to-face classroom, and how can we prepare them? Because as we said, they recommend that we start preparing them in our pre-service training programs. Are we including this stuff in our pre-service training programs? I get a lot of resistance when I say you should add this. You should add this into your program. And I understand that there's the resistance because our programs are already full of so many things. So I recommend that we think about transferring of skills. What kinds of things are we doing now that we can translate into the online environment by showing our teachers how they can do that? And that doesn't mean how can I take my traditional face-to-face classroom and put it online, but how can I transfer the skills such as communication into the online environment? What does it look like, the communication in my traditional classroom, and what does it look like, the communication in my online classroom? And then that can effectively reduce we don't have an online language teaching class, but rather we incorporate it in our existing teaching programs where we show it's an option and something that's very prevalent. The other thing is the way that time is distributed in our online language teaching courses, that I saw definitive, they had issues with the amount of recognition they got for the time that they we're putting into these courses. And so I think in future studies, we need to look at this sort of time distribution. And then we also need to offer a wide range of professional development, because we did have half of our individuals wanting unstructured, half of our individuals wanting structured professional development. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all. We can't offer a structured course and have that fit everyone who's teaching language online. Many of them said that they were embarrassed that they hadn't gone out to seek additional professional development, but they couldn't find courses that fit into what it is that their existing schedules were like. So they struggled with this time and the time distribution. I want to finish up here with the quote from an individual. This is the only thing they said in their open comments to me. "You have no idea what it's like to have a real job," which is such an interesting thing. And at first I was slightly offended that they were making judgments as to me and who I am and my experience. But as I thought about this, I think it perfectly sums up the challenge of online language learning, that there are a lot of complexities and a lot of things in it, but we can simplify it. So I asked a whole lot of things because I said, I want to know about all of these things. But what I found was that there was a lot of ability to transfer skills and a lot of ability to sort of make it easier for us to incorporate these things into our existing training programs. And so these are some of my recommendations of questions that you ask yourself as I think about incorporating training programs into my online. What are skills that can be transferred to the online environment? And what kind of technology am I currently teaching, and can it be effectively used online? Because again, they struggled so much with that technology. Can I, instead of having them develop a course using technology for a face-to-face, develop it for an online? And how are you teaching assessment, and can it be effectively used online? These are things that you can easily sort of change. And then, can you provide a practicum experience? And then the last one, are you teaching how to build a professional learning network? And that's it. That was a really awful ending.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. This is a good time to ask some questions. I'm going to have to run around, so if you do have a question, just let me know.
You specifically didn't look at what you called tutors or kind of non-professional teachers who are not working in a structured institution.
Yes.
What of this do you think would transfer to those kind of tutors?
To the kind of tutors? I think that tutors struggle, I mean, I haven't looked at it extensively, and I don't think very many people have. I think they struggle with that recognition of time, just like these individuals do, because they get paid for the lesson, not necessarily the prep of the lesson. And so some of the individuals in here said, nobody teaches us how to manage and negotiate that contract. So how do I advocate for more time for the amount of time that I'm putting in here? So I think that's a great transfer. And then I also think the technology, the new tutors are going to struggle with technologies just like the new teachers did, because they have to learn this tech system, and they might have more pressure because they don't get paid if it doesn't work.
Thank you so much. Any more questions?
I think we're good.
No, thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was wonderful. Let's give her another round of applause. Our second presenter is Yoon Kyung Chae. She is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Language Education at Indiana University, Bloomington. Her research interests include second language writing, ESL, EFL writing, college writing for multilingual learners, teacher education, COL, and instructional technology. She's currently working on her doctoral dissertation, which investigates the relations between writing teachers' beliefs and practices in terms of different modes of teacher response on students' writing. Please welcome Yoon at the podium.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yoon Che from Indiana University. Today, I'm going to talk about two different modes of teachers' feedback on international students' writing, international or multilingual learners. And actually, this is a part of pilot case study for my doctoral dissertation. But I think these findings from this pilot study looks very interesting to the attendee at this TESOL conference. So I think I try, and I'm here now. Okay. So I guess nowadays most of English teachers conventional way of giving feedback to on students' writing would be probably one of the first three. So like handwriting on paper or using Microsoft Word's editing tool. And I think these two would be, we could say this written mode of teacher feedback. Or teachers sometimes have like a one-on-one teacher and student conference at their office or something. And that would be oral mode of teacher's feedback. So I think these three would be the most conventional and traditional way, common way nowadays. Is there any other ways you are trying or you have experience other than these three? Any other? Okay, what is? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, here comes Marta.
I work at a community college in East Tennessee, and everything that I have my students submit goes through Turnitin. Then there's a Turnitin feedback studio. So that's what I primarily use. Is that,
yeah.
or if it's not working, and then I do handwrite it on paper. But most of the time, that's what we find most efficient.
I heard about that too. Actually, yesterday. Yeah.
Sometimes it's good to use a combination of a little note, say on Microsoft Word, but then screencast it so you're talking about what you've indicated.
You already got it.
student.
Okay, yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think that's interesting to hear that. So as a background of this study, from previous research found that both teachers and students still express some frustration about teachers' written feedback. So from a teacher's perspective, they're still struggling with like heavy schedule or time pressure when it comes to a large writing class, or they have some concern about their high quantity or quality of communication in written mode of comments. And from students' perspective as well, there's still a lack of understanding teachers' written mode of feedback, probably because of level of their language difficulty or some academic literacy. And also, since our students are ESL or like international students, they may have diverse needs with their background, different background, right? So still they have some struggling issues like this. So today I'm going to talk about these two different modes, which are written feedback, like a traditional way of feedback, and audio-visual feedback, like she mentioned, using an instructional technology called Screencast Technology, and yeah, we call it as an audio-visual feedback mode. And so I'll briefly introduce about what a screencast technology is. So it's also called video screen capture, and so so think about like a screenshot. Everybody knows what screenshot is, right? So it captures a one moment shot of your computer screen as an image, right? But when it comes to a screencast or video screen capture, it captures all the moves, all the activities of your computer screen as a video with your voiceover narration. So it's actually your recording of your voice with your activity on your computer screen, okay? So that's the difference between screenshot and screencast, okay? So think of like if you have experience to attend any webinar, I think you must have seen any screencast recording, because like a webinar host and attendees, they are watching the same screen, like a PowerPoint like this, while the hosts are talking about, right? So that's one example of screenshot recording. And there are many screencast software out there we can use for free, or something they should be paid. So like Zing or Snagit, Kaltura, Camtasia, Kaizena, and much more than this. But for my study, I specifically chose Zing, the first one, because it is free and it's really user-friendly, so everybody can just get it right away. And the process of recording is very simple and quick. So, and also the sound quality, because it is related to recording things, so sound quality is pretty important too. So, and it has good sound quality, and yeah, that's the thing. And the other software, like basically they're based on this Screencast technology, but the difference between these are whether it is free or paid, or whether maybe there's a time limit of recording. Maybe they have different time limit of recording, or if these softwares are supported by university IT or not. So for example, Zing, actually this is just totally independent one. But in case of like Kaltura, actually our institution, we are supporting Kaltura as one of our IT systems. So yeah, those kind of thing. Okay, so for this study, I chose Zing. So briefly about my pilot case study. So the purpose of this study is to explore writing teacher and multilingual international students, their perceptions about these two different modes of feedback. And the participants are writing teacher at university IP program, and the student is multilingual student, international student. And the method I used were document and discourse analysis on teachers' feedback, two different modes of feedback, and semi-structured interviews with both. So as a data for written feedback, I'm sure everybody are familiar with this one, right? So yeah, so this is how it works. So I think I don't have to show how to do this about this mode, written mode. So this is by using Microsoft Word's editing tool, right? So this would be, this is a data as a written mode of feedback. So here's the interesting thing. So this is audio-visual feedback using Zing software I mentioned on students' TOEFL essay. So I'm gonna briefly show you how it looks like.
This is a very well way for the TOEFL IBT writing independent test. For one, I really like that the essay is definitely answering the question. One of the things that I highlight when it comes to academic writing is answer the question. This is not something that everybody can do, and many advanced writers often do not answer the question. And this writer apparently answered the question, which means the thesis statement right here is directly addressing the given statement by saying that the writer, doesn't agree with the given statement. So having a clear thesis statement in the first paragraph is a big plus. And I would say also that this essay has clear paragraph organization with clear introduction, body 1, body 2, body 3, and short conclusion. So this is very well organized essay. So this is also good.
Okay, so this is how it looks like when we use audiovisual feedback. So I want to point out some things about it. So first, teacher select the area of her screen just with Word program, right? Other than that, there's no other space, but she select the area of Word program. And did you see her mouse movement when she's talking? So I think that's important thing for a student, because without this mouse pointing or movement, maybe student will be distracted or they will be lost where teacher is talking about. So I think that's important for teachers to actively move their mouse point to navigate students. And the second thing is, if you look at around here, so before she started recording, she already put some error correction. Can you see here? Since this student, he was an advanced level learner, actually there were a few grammar mistakes. So she didn't have to like tons and tons of grammar error correction, but actually the teacher, she, so before recording, she already used her written mode. And then she opened that commented file, and based on that one, she added or combined her audio-visual mode. So, which means she combined every mode in this one recording file, okay? And so, and I think for maybe for beginning level learner, you can just do this while you're recording here. And I'm gonna talk about that a little bit later. But so what I'm talking is, teacher can use every, like whether it is a written mode or audiovisual mode, they can just combine whatever they wanna do. So they can just do totally separately, or they can just combine by using this software, okay? And okay, so this is how it looks like when you use audiovisual mode. And if you wanna see how to use this one, maybe please just come to see after this presentation, and I can just show you very quickly. It's very easy to learn, okay? And as a result, based on the documentation analysis of teachers' comments, I think I want to point out the number of words per each comment. So when we compare those two different modes, of course, this is speaking versus writing. So of course, the number of words on audiovisual feedback mode should be much more than writing, right? But what I want to point out here is actually whether the teacher focused on global level, such as like structure of the essay or idea or contents. If she focused on global issue or local issue, such as just grammar or citation or punctuation thing. So because from my the literature review from previous study, many studies found that if teacher use audio-visual feedback mode, they are likely to more pay attention to global level rather than local issue. But in my case study here, I think there was not that differences between global versus local. Then I think probably because my student participants is an advanced learner, so maybe he didn't have many grammar mistake. That's why. So, but I think if the student is beginning level, maybe the case would be different, I guess. Yeah. And more interesting findings were from actually interviews with them. So from teacher's perspective, I want to point out first, she mentioned about students' proficiency level. This student participants was advanced level, but when I asked the teacher about how would you use this audiovisual feedback mode to your actual student, and she mentioned that since I'm teaching at a lower level writing class, maybe I think when I when I want to point out about their grammar or something very simple one, maybe just using writing mode would be just simple and quick. But when if I use audiovisual mode, maybe just talking every detail of grammar just one by one would be just complicated by using audiovisual feedback mode. So she think for lower level learner, maybe writing mode would be better. But for advanced level learner, like our student participants, maybe since they tend to have few grammar mistakes, but rather than maybe they have more issues about like a global issue such as ideas or content or something like that. In that case, maybe just speaking about those things would be much better than writing all the details, right? So yeah, she mentioned about maybe it really depends on the student's proficiency level, and also I think the more important thing from teachers' perspective was if you look at down there, priority of comment. So since this Zing software is a 5-minute time limit for recording, so she has to think beforehand about what she's talking about her comments. So I found that she started recording the most significant and important things for students first, okay? Not by the order, but so she herself put the priority of her comments, and then she just, so like we saw before, so first she mentioned about she praised the student that, okay, you did a good job at answering the question, and it is a really important thing for TOEFL essays, something like that. Actually, even though it was not a negative or constructive criticism, but she is talking about like a good thing, but she is explaining why it is good for, as a TOEFL essay writing, so something like that. So she kind of herself, she first put her priority of comments in terms of its significance first, and actually it was delivered to students' perspective as well. So the students first talk about, can you see the blue circle one? The student mentioned about he liked this mode because there's a flow of comments, not just one by one, just simple and little comments, but since he was he heard he was hearing this kind of video thing, so he could catch the flow of comment and what the teacher was talking about. So he also catch the priority and what the most important thing for my essay. So that's really a good point. So I guess by when it comes to audiovisual feedback mode, I think it's kind of like a holistic approach to give feedback. But when you think of like a written mode, it's just linear way, just giving comment one by order. But I think that's a big difference between those two different modes. And from students' perspective as well, the second blue circle, he also mentions, okay, it feels like I'm in a virtual conference with teacher actually, even though he did not talk himself, but just by hearing teacher's real voice about her comments, he mentioned that, okay, it's like a one-on-one session, advising session at her office or something. And actually, even though they do not know each other, but he feels like just by hearing her real voice or tones of her speaking, he mentioned that, okay, I can feel her emotional support, and her feedback, her comments is kind of personalized one to me, and that kind of thing. I think, and these actually will imply about like for students' motivation about their own essay. I think that's a important thing as well. And the third finding from students' perspective was, okay, this mode, he said this mode makes him think more deeply and more serious about his own essay. Yeah, so I think, and he didn't feel at all by written mode. So like by written mode, he's just doing like a machine. Okay, I'm doing because of what I have to do. But after listening audiovisual feedback mode, he feels like I want to do this more after hearing her voice. Okay, so that's I think interesting thing. So these are kind of findings from teachers and students' perspective in terms of two different modes. So so around this mode, of course, we have many around factors, like for internal factors of teachers' belief about how to respond students' essay. So like if teachers they tend to make every grammar correction, or they use like an indirect mode of feedback or something like that. So those beliefs, and or there are also external factors such as students' learning style or their proficiency level, like I told you before, or class size, time constraint, or even school culture or school support. And these are some factors around here. But what I want to say today is not just counting on only written mode, but at least being aware of this complementary option of audiovisual feedback mode will improve multimodality of teachers' feedback on students' writing. And I think it's not just about ESL or EFL, so it's all about any writing, I guess. Like even at graduate level, or like between faculty and graduate students, something, they just provide this mode as well. So yeah, that's all about my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yoon. This is a good time for questions.
Do you have a Twitter account or something where we can follow you?
Did I have what?
A Twitter account or an email or something where we can...
Just come to me. Okay.
Are there any more questions?
And actually, I have a handout at front, and I uploaded this PowerPoint file, but I did not upload the... Actually, I described the tutorial of this Screencast technology. I didn't upload it, and I don't want to share online that one. So if you want to just, if you're interested in using that one as your follow-up, you can just pick just one of it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, this is the end of our panel discussion with our graduate students. Thank you so much for coming. One more thing, Ellen, do we have any webcast questions? We did not. That's amazing. 5 people attended us from all over the world. Thank you again for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference.